Okay, welcome to Biblical Gymnastics, and it's great to be here. It's a privilege to be with you guys today, and this is Biblical Gymnastics 2, episode 2. Last week we had a good time. But we had some audio issues, so hopefully this one's a lot better and we don't have those issues today. So let's introduce ourselves. Hi, my name is Joel, and it's my pleasure to be here today. And I'm just a guy that loves Jesus. So, my co-host, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Russell, and I'm more than a guy that loves Jesus. I'm a great guy that loves Jesus.
All right.
And I'm Lexine. I'm also a woman of God who loves Jesus. I'm going to continue to. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the one thing we all claim to have in common is that we love Jesus. And I say claim because you never know the hearts of men. So hey, listen, man. I can talk for myself. I know me. All right. Great. So today, what we're going to do is So today, what we're going to do is we're going to actually take some time. We're going to watch an interview by Ricky Gervais and Russell Branson. I think that's his name, right? Russell Branson. I think that's his name. Yeah. So we're going to watch just parts of the interview because Ricky talks about his atheism, and so today what we're going to and specific parts of that. So guys, if you're going to watch something, please put on your headphones or something just to avoid the feedbacking, because it will be a loop that kind of goes around. So we're just going to take some time. We're going to watch some clips from the interview, and what we're going to try to do today is address some of the things that he says, right? Or just have a conversation about it in a sense. What do we think about, what he's saying? So hopefully today, by the end of today's conversation, today's episode, we should have talked about atheism just as a system. The idea of this self-spirituality that people have, and and a little bit about the relative morality that is espoused by those of the secular system. So hopefully we can see this, and we'll see what we've got. So we're going to do the first clip right now because I want to just jump right into it. I don't want to waste anyone's time. Let's jump right into it. So we're going to do the first clip, okay, and we'll see what we got. All right, so just give me a second here, and let's get the clip set up. Okay, so this is the first clip from the video that and let's see. Let's do this.
I think the way you're going is that I seem a spiritual person, but not literally, and that's totally true. That I'm in as much awe at seeing a tree or a mountain or a bird or a river as anyone who thinks God made it. I see the beauty of nature, and I think most, and I don't know this, but you're right. There's a huge difference between spirituality. There's something to the self that gets you through, that you want to know the reason, you want to connect, all those things. I feel all those things without the belief in a God or gods. Religion's something else. Religion basically says you want to get into heaven. I know him. You just got to do this shit for me, and we're cool. We know that everything that's ever started was written by usually a man with an agenda. It's like, it's no coincidence all those rules in the Old Testament sort of favor certain men.
Okay, all right. So okay, well, that was a lot. So let's start there. let's start there. There are a few things that he says, right? Because this conversation, and I, anyone that wants to watch the video, please go ahead and watch the entire video, because I actually think there are some points made that that are interesting. Especially when you look at them from a Christian worldview. There are a few things that we can learn from them, and there are just a few things that we can even just to understand how people think about, what they see. So the right off, I'm gonna throw it out to you guys. So what do you think? What do you think of what you just said? Like, what are your thoughts?
You want to go first, Lexi?
I mean, I can go first. So I'm a super nerd, and when I first watched it, I sort of did like this diagram of like spirituality versus religion. And I think his blanket statement is accurate, right? Like there is in terms of religion, there is like an equation, do this and then get this. But I think for Christianity is a little bit different. And so it's sort of important to sort of specify religions so that we can talk about like, why is Christianity different? I know that sort of takes us in a different avenue altogether, but that's like the framework, or like that's my perspective that I'm coming into the conversation. So I'm like, okay, I get that for most religions it's about the good works or whatever, but for Christianity is a little bit different. So let's unpack, or let's explore why Christianity is different. So that's the first thing that came to my mind. And then also the way that he defines spirituality is interesting. Like the concept of connecting with like nature and connecting with other things is just like, why is that attributed to the spiritual world and not the physical world? So I was just really curious about that.
Yep. Yeah, sounds about right. And to be fair, he's not one of the more radical kind of atheists. He's more softer if you listen to the entire thing he's saying. So to be fair, he's not wrong. Because when you say religion, spirituality, that's not Christianity, right? So really, it's not really attacking Christianity. He's attacking a version of Christianity that he's been exposed to. And if you kind of watch the whole clip, he talks about how he was brought up in a Christian home, because he talked about his mom. So yeah. I whatever he says, I actually don't even disagree with a lot of it, because it's not talking about Christianity. He brings up the Old Testament, the typical talking points you hear about the Old Testament. So yeah, it's nothing new that he said here. Well, we can go into more detail, but just off the jump, he hasn't said anything new that hasn't been said before.
Yeah, well, I guess but there are a few things that he said that I think are important for us to address. For example, he talks about how the Bible in general, right, written by men with agendas, right, and how so it can be trusted, okay, and the whole concept of spirituality in itself is not reliant on a God, for you to experience all the things that we're supposed to experience. So I want us to kind of touch on just the fact that the idea that the Bible was written by men, and he said a very specific kind of man that had an agenda. The Bible was written for that man, because it benefited him. So do we have an insight into that? Do we have is there anything do we have a response to that?
Well, not just the Bible. He's basically talking about religion in general. That religions are basically
but unfortunately, brother, this is called biblical gymnastics.
Okay.
This is not called this is not called Quran gymnastics.
Let's
go on.
So that notion that again, it's a misunderstanding, obviously, and it's difficult to have a conversation like this if the person doesn't allow for time to dig deeper. But nonetheless, on the surface, the Bible is written by men with an agenda. Okay, wrong. We know as Christians, because if we're coming from the Christian perspective, the Bible isn't written by men with their agenda, right? It's written by men for God's agenda, and that's the problem. So if you respond to Ricky Gervais and say, hey, yes, although the Bible is written by men, because books are written by men, God doesn't inscribe books except for like the Ten Commandments. But he does. They're all written by men, fine. But can we at least discuss on who the inspiration behind it? Because where we disagree is you think it's man's agenda, which, you call it man's will, but that's not what the Bible says, right? The Bible tells us that it's written not by man's will, but by God's will given to man to inscribe. So that's already a point that we disagree on because it's not true. It's simply not true.
All right. So, Lexi, what about you? What do you think?
I think a good rebuttal to it is that, like, if I were to write the Bible, I think that I would allow certain things, like if I am guilty of certain things, I would not make it a bad thing, if that makes sense. So like everything good and bad would stop with me. But I think that the way the Bible is written, it exposes the heart of man. Like everybody is guilty, right? So it's hard to say that like somebody is writing something with a bias, but then it exposes their sin as well, right? So it's a pretty not objective, but pretty standardized in a way that like it covers every sin, it covers everybody, and therefore it's hard to say that it's a biased piece of text because it's not exclusive to any one person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, it does. It does. And because I think you make a very interesting point there, because first of all, the Bible wasn't written by one man, right? It was written by a plethora of people, right? Different people from different works of life with different, and to have a cohesive story, first of all, that's insane, right? For everything to point to Christ is crazy, right? But then the second thing is, if it was written for the agenda of a man, what was the agenda, right? Because let's say if I wrote the book of Job, what is the agenda in the book of Job? Like, what point am I trying to make in the book of Job? The guy suffers the entire time. Then God comes and says, who are you to talk back to me or to ask me questions? Like, who are you? That is literally, and then God blesses him. So what is the point there? Go ahead.
I can speak to that because I think the Bible has been weaponized, right? Which is kind of like a pun because the Bible's a sword. But I think that it's being used to enslave people. It's being used to oppress people. And so in that respect, oppress women. So in that respect, it's possible for somebody to see that sort of agenda. But I think that is because pieces of the Bible is taken out of context, right? So as you said, the Bible is this like love story between God and man and reconciliation or whatever. But pieces of it can be misconstrued for an agenda. And it has been used, so he's justified in saying that because it's happened. You know what I mean?
True. But,
let me add this.
Hold on a second. But you could say that about anything else, right? About anything else. Like, you could have the purest thing and someone could weaponize it for their own gain. But it doesn't mean the thing itself was unpure, right? Or had impurities in it. So, and that's the whole thing. If we're going to look at the Bible itself, because what he's saying, the assertion he's making, right, or the statement he made, wasn't that it has been weaponized. He said the agenda behind the written thing. So those are two different things. If he said it had been weaponized by men, I would say, okay, cool, I understand that. But if you're going to say that the writers had agendas to push, their own goals, then we have to redefine what that goal was. Because when he said it, all I could think about was, is he saying the Bible was written by old white men? Because it just sounded like that. Like, what people say, like, old white men, the Christian religion is old white men. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. No. So I think sometimes, and I think you make a good point there. Sometimes these things have just become, have just become almost taglines that people use to demean the word of God in that sense, and just to make everything to like, oh, it's this, it's that, and no one ever questions it and says how, where, and stuff like that. In that sense, go ahead, Ross.
And to prove the fact, again, it's unfair because it's obvious he hasn't read the Bible, the entire Bible, and it's also obvious he doesn't understand it. But that's okay. You don't expect anyone to. But the problem is he's making a kind of like a statement from authority, like he knows, that the Bible, it has an agenda. Okay, fine. But even if you go through, like you rightfully said, and you read, just pick a book of the Bible, when you read it, let's take the books of Moses for instance, right? So they were written by Moses. Okay, if Moses had an agenda of his own, right, it wouldn't. There's some things in there that wouldn't show up, right? Because the book of Moses shows Moses' weakness, his anger. He killed a guy here. Did he kill two people? Yeah, I think no. He killed one person here. He buried them. He was afraid. He was fearful. He stuttered a lot. He disobeyed God. And guess what? He didn't make it into the promised land. I mean, that's not if I'm trying to portray myself as a particular way, it's not gonna be all bumpy. I'm not gonna show all the rough side. I'm gonna show all the smooth things, and points is a thing. But even if at the end of the day, if you just look at what's the agenda or what's the purpose behind this particular, we're using Moses now. It was to God, like it had nothing to do with him. It was showing how Moses has someone who is basically, for lack of a better word, a nobody, gets picked up by the Lord to use to deliver a people. Like, what's the agenda there? You see what I'm saying? So it's a very kind of dishonest, and which is why I said in the beginning that if you're talking about in general, like, religious books, okay, fine, right? But if we're talking about the Bible specifically, that catchphrase or that cliche does not apply. And this applies to every other book. If you're looking throughout the entire Bible, the people who wrote them, oftentimes they were weak people. And the weakness is clearly shown in the text.
That I think it did make it clear that the agenda might be that people want an answer for death and want a meaning to life. And so he could, if he were in this conversation, he could come back and say, like, well, I did say that people fear death and people want a reason to be alive. And so they articulate this elaborate story and it makes everything make sense. So I think that on his end, that's probably where he was getting at.
Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the next clip, right? Watch the next clip, just, pay attention to what he says again. And then let's just see, what we can take from it. And if there is anything that, is of interest, or if there's any response that we have for it. All right. So let's.
Yep.
From, and also technically atheism doesn't even mean you don't believe in God. It means that you believe there's no God. It means that you just haven't found God yet. There's no evidence, and that is true. It's core, and I've explained this many times that technically I'm an agnostic atheist because one deals with knowledge and one deals with belief. So no one knows. If we agree that no one knows, we're all atheists. So now, what do you think? And believers say, I think there is a God. And atheists think, I don't think there is a God because I haven't got any evidence yet. So that is all I'm saying. As you say, religion's something else to belief and spirituality. And, and people even say to me, if someone proved there was a God, would you believe? I go, well, of course I would. It wouldn't even be belief, it would be knowledge. It would also be the greatest discovery ever. Let's cancel the Nobel from now on. He's discovered God. It's done. And I think if that would change everything, I think. But until we know, I just don't. I don't want to live my life by a belief in something that I have no evidence in. That's all. That's all I'm saying. And I sometimes say to people that a good Christian or a good Muslim or a good Jew or whatever is someone who does all the good bits in that holy book and ignores the bad bits. And I say, if you already know right from wrong, you don't need the book. And you have to cherry pick.
Well, I think that's interesting. Let's do this here. Okay. All right. So that's a lot. What do we think? The floor is open.
Well, there was a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just start with the parts toward the end, and we can work our way back. I'll let me take this part. You can probably take the other part. The part about the basic, we're all good people argument, right? And he says, good Christians do good things, and then bad Christians do bad things. Now, that's perspective coming from outside. Unfortunately, that's even a perspective from within, but that's neither here or there. And he says, well, if that's the case, you don't need a book to tell you what's good and bad. And that's kind of contradictory. Like, okay, so how do you, what becomes that one objective standard that defines good or bad? Because he even says at some point that morality is subjective. And that's all defeating. That's like a self-defeating argument. If you're saying you don't need a book to tell you what's good and bad, or should we say we don't need a God to tell you what's good and bad, then you're basically defining that for yourself. That's already a big problem. We can go into there. And then the other thing about evidence, that he's an agnostic atheist. Agnostic basically says you can't know essentially that God exists. That's an agnostic. An atheist basically disbelieves in whether God exists or not, right? So he's combining both. So basically, you can't know whether or not to believe or disbelieve. It's like, essentially, even if you bring evidence, you've already basically said that, well, we can't really know. So whatever evidence you bring is already kind of flawed. And there have been quite a few atheists who've gone down this rabbit hole, and they said, look, all I need is evidence. Which is why I think there's hope for Ricky Gervais. There really is, because he's not one of the radical ones who don't even want to open that door. Because he opened the door by saying, if someone shows me evidence, I'll believe. I've heard some other ones who say, even if there was evidence, they wouldn't believe. So there's hope for him. But the evidence is simply Jesus Christ. That's the evidence. We can talk about how we can come to that conclusion, but the fact that God came down, said, here I am, right? Of course, they killed him. And if anyone would just follow the breadcrumbs to Christ and work their way back, the belief will be evidence. So the fact that there's no evidence, it's like he's looking for someone to open the sky and say, I am God, basically. Or he's looking for God to come down to him specifically. And the problem is God's not going to do that, number one. And the problem is anything that God does to show that he's real, unless it falls within what he considers evidence, he's not going to accept it. So there's a lot of contradiction there, but let me just pause there and let someone else chime in.
All right, so Lex.
Wow, he gave me a nickname. Okay, so I don't think anyone is too far gone. So even if you're a radical atheist, I think that you could still come to the faith. But agnostic might be like a softer version of an atheist. I had a friend who was an agnostic before she converted. And it's kind of like, I don't reject that there could be a God, but like how he later says in the video that God could be like nature or something, like some rendition of that. But I do think that there's something to explore around the fact that he said that you know right from wrong, so you don't need religion. He said something along those lines, right? And I think that in Romans 1 or 2, it kind of talks about how like we at some point knew God and our consciousness convicts us. And so in some ways, he's right in that we have an idea of right from wrong from the jump. But it's not about right or wrong in the Christian faith, right? So I think that is like God is reconciling us and then we are saved for good works. So after we've been saved, he does the good works through us, but it's not like, don't do this and do this. That's not what the faith is really about. And so that's why I think that like his conversation is like a blanket, like this is what all religions believe, right? But when it comes to Christianity, the reason why Christianity is so different is because it's more of a relational situation. It's not this like follow this principle and then check this list, if that makes sense. It's an interaction between God and man. So I think that is
which is why
what?
So which is why he's not back to the thing. He's not talking about Christianity. It's again, he's missing the boat on what it means to be a Christian, a believer in Christ. Right. Which is why the argument that he's making he's lumping religions, which is why I don't even disagree with you. You're not talking about Christianity, because Christianity doesn't say Christians should do good things and ignore the bad things. That's not what Christianity is about, right? Fundamentally speaking. So he's already missed it there. But the problem is, and I think to your point about weaponizing the Bible, there's been the wrong portrayal of Christianity, because, you know, his understanding of Christianity stems from, this part wasn't played in the video, but if you watch the whole video, there was a discussion about how Christ seems to be this cosmic nanny, right? That he's making, you know, like a spiritual spy, just watching you do this, don't do that, right? So there's a mix up between, you know, the law, legal, and all of that kind of wrapped together. So there's already a big misunderstanding on what it means to be a Christian, how to live as a Christian, and oftentimes that's come from what they've seen, right? Which is a problem in and of itself. But he's missed the boat on morality, because Christianity doesn't acknowledges that morality is something accessible, which is, you know, Romans talks about that. Talks about the fact that you don't need to be a Christian to do quote unquote good things.
Yeah.
But then you miss the boat. That's not Christianity, you know. So I just wanted to put that out.
Yeah, and something else that we have to note, because he says there's no proof for God. Because and I think there are a few things that he said there that I think is quite interesting. He says there's no proof for God, you know, and then you know, the positioning of how, because, you know, Ross, even though you keep saying he's not talking about Christianity, I think he is. Because I think Christianity is the top religion in his head when he's speaking about this stuff. The other religions behind Christianity, but Christianity is the number one religion, because you keep hearing him talk back about Christianity. He doesn't mention Islam at all throughout the entire video, once, but he talks about Christianity over and over again. So I think when he thinks about religion, Christianity is the first thing in his head. So whatever he's saying, it's a rebuke of Christianity, in that sense, which I think that's how it should be. I think if someone doesn't want to follow God, the religion they should hate the most is Christianity, you know, but here's what he said there is no proof of God. Now, when I have conversations with atheists, for most, you know, typically when we discuss or we talk about these things, you know, I try to use as little scripture as I can.
Yeah.
As little scripture as I can, because they don't believe it. So if they don't believe it, there's no point of quoting something that someone doesn't believe, right? An authority that they don't trust as an authority. So what I try to do is to speak to them based off of what they understand, which is one of the clips that we'll see towards the end today. Because there's some that was said that I was just like, this is the answer, because it's so easy. It's not even complicated. You know, he talked about this, but earlier in the video, he talked about nature and how he loves animals. He loves all these things, you know, and he sees the beauty in everything. Yeah. So but it's crazy how they don't add 1 + 1 is 2. It's like, you see the beauty in all these things. How can something this beautiful be accidental? How can something be this great be accidental? And I think Russell I was about to say Russell, you know, we have two Russells. Russell Brunson says something later on, which I actually think is quite interesting. What was his name?
I think isn't it Russell Brand? Russell
Is it
Brand?
Brand? I don't know why I keep calling him Branson.
Yeah, Brand.
I'm sorry, Russell Brand. If you watch this video, I'm sorry. I don't know why. Your name just sounds cool as a Branson. Just add the S-O-N at the end. Russell Brand. Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. My apologies. So Russell Brand keeps saying something that I think is quite interesting. Or he says something later on that I think is quite interesting. Because he talks about how the experiences he has experienced, nature and all these other things, right? And he's able to see that there is something there, even though I don't think he can quantify it. It sounds similar to what Paul does when it comes to the city and sees that they're worshiping the unknown God, and then he has to redefine who the unknown God is. You can see Russell Brand has, you know, he knows that the unknown God is there, but he's trying to define the unknown God based off of nature. And based off of the experience that he has experienced. So he's going based off, he knows that there's something grander than all this, you know, but he's just, you know, and he's trying to define it the way he can, you know. So I think if we say that there is no proof of God, I don't think that's a logical statement. I don't even think that's a scientific statement. because it's one of the easiest thing to think about, and you hear a lot of people say this. I wouldn't come to a building and say this building there's no builder. The first assumption I would make is that a builder made it. Like, that's the first thing I would assume. I wouldn't come to a building and go, well, the building just fell from the sky. Like, that's crazy. It's like, what? What sky? What sky did you know what I'm saying? Who made it in the sky and threw it down? Like, you know what I'm saying? You start asking questions, right? How did this building, what formed it in the sky before it came down? So the point is when he says there is no proof, I don't think that's an intelligent statement. I don't even think that's an intellectual statement. Now, if he says, I don't believe the proof, or I don't believe what I have seen, and I want to attribute this to something else, that is a good intellectual, and that's a truthful statement. I don't believe someone created this. I don't want to believe someone created it. Fine, cool, yeah. But if you say there is no proof that a creation has a creator, it's like,
yeah,
what?
Yeah, which is why, remember, I made a point that even if proof is brought, if it doesn't fall into what he considers as proof, it's still going to reject it. So the same thing as, go ahead, Lexi, you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I'm fidgeting over here. So I think you were going there, Russell. There is like a principle of science, or like there's a metric by which they're measuring proof, right? Mm-hmm. So if it doesn't fall within that principle, then it cannot be proven, right? If you're not using whatever formula, whatever equation, or whatever scientific method or whatever, then it can't be proven. And so I think, to the point you said earlier, you have to level with atheists and use logic. You cannot go straight to the Bible, but I think that we're both talking faith. So if you're saying that it's the Big Bang Theory, well, where did the particles of matter come from, or the force, or the gravity, or energy? Like, where is the actual starting point? And you can't answer that in either. And so then we are like at the same level, because we both have some level of faith. So I think that it's not that it's ridiculous that there's no proof. It's more so that what their metric of proof is not falling within their metric of proof. That makes sense.
Yeah, but even with that though, I still think that's a cop out. Why? Because here's the thing. There's one thing to say, and this is the reason why, if someone tells me they're agnostic, right? I don't know, right? To me, I think that's a better standing point. Like, I don't know, I'm just not sure. Great! Now let's have a conversation about it, right? If someone tells me there is no God, you have made, at that point, you're not looking for something, you have come to a conclusion. And you have said, this is the conclusion of it. Science cannot make that conclusion. Because people keep talking about this thing like it's scientific. It's not. Science observes the natural law and tries to explain it. That's what it does. So what it can't explain, it says, I can't explain this yet. I am working on it. But science won't say this thing does not exist because I can't explain it. And he talks about this later when he's talking about quantum physics, right? So he talks about this later, which is actually interesting that they don't see this.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You can't come to a conclusion for something that you cannot explain. Just say, hey, I don't know. I am not sure. Right. Good. That's a good starting point for a conversation. Then I can tell you why I'm sure, and maybe, you know what I'm saying? Even if you don't agree, it's cool. But if someone comes and says, no. What? Okay, show me your proof that is no. Tell me it's no. Show me how. You know what I'm saying? Go ahead, Lexi.
I really don't want to take this there, but I feel like we have to, because I think that it's not about atheists, and it has everything to do with our understanding of predestination versus free will.
Are we going there?
Yeah, I don't think I actually don't think we should go there. I think that should be like bookmarked for another conversation. But I do think that, like, if people have eyes that cannot see and ears that cannot hear, then it makes sense for them to not understand, right? Like, it's foolishness, like it doesn't make sense. Like it's intentional that it doesn't make sense, right? So then coming up with a whole system of how to evangelize, or like not evangelize, but how to reach a certain conclusion is futile if that's the intention. You know what I mean? So I think that there's some exploration that we need to do in terms of, like, I don't know. I'm just going to leave that right there. Leave it right there.
Yeah. I think but even with that, right? When we talk about predestination, we talk about those are called by God, and Isaac and also, even with that, right? There are a lot of these atheists that will be saved. It's just the way it is, right? So
Okay.
so our job, even if you have that conversation, our job is not to decide for anything. Our job is to face what we're looking at right now, right? And work according to faith and what God has asked us to do. We preach the gospel and we try to explain everything that we can, right? We understand truth and try to explain to others. My job, and this is why I would never get into a debate with someone about that stuff, because it doesn't matter. I do what God has asked me to do, right? He makes the decisions after that. But I do what he has asked me to do. And so when we're talking about this conversation, right, part of the beautiful thing about it, and part of why I think this conversation is important and why I think we should look at it, is this, is to understand it and hopefully maybe share it with folks who might be struggling with these questions, right? Or we're struggling with these things to kind of get that it's not as logical as it sounds. That's literally what I'm trying to show. It's not as logic. It sounds logical until you actually put it under their own logic metric. Then it starts crumbling. You're like, something is off here. You're not applying the same standard to everything. For some things, you waver. If you're going to be flat, let it be flat. But anyway, let's go to the next video because we could stay there all day today talking about that one thing. So let's go to the next clip. We're just going to jump to this one now, and let's do this.
I just think.
Let me pause this quickly. This.
I feel I don't need it. I just don't need a structured guidebook outside my own morality. And morality is relative and not absolute. And you'd have to keep. Dogma is the problem. I think dogma is the real problem. And it's not just in religion.
Okay, I think So let's talk about that because that to me is interesting. Because he says it there that he doesn't think he needs to follow any system to apply. He which is actually funny because I think this is what Scripture talks about. It's not that the truth is not there. It's just that they don't want to subject themselves to the authority of God. Like men want to be free. We like the fruit in the garden. We like the idea that we can become gods. We like the idea that we can make the rules for ourselves. So it's a lot easier to say God is not there because God hasn't spoken to you personally and come down from. And even if he came down from heaven, you will explain it as a dream. I slept and I dreamt, so thereby I can do whatever I want. So let's open it up to. So based on what he said, what do we think? What do we think?
Same fruit of the same tree. Basically, they're at the end of the day. Everyone is trying to, when I mean everyone, I mean, if you're outside of belief in God, you're trying to run away from God because you can't escape it. God is basically everywhere. Everything points to him in some measure. And this is another one of those, it's called a strand or another branch of the same tree. He says that he doesn't need a structure, right? Outside his own morality. And that's a very interesting statement. And then he says, correct me if I'm wrong. It says dogma is the problem, and dogma is just basically like a set of beliefs, a set of principles, or we can call it structure, right? So he doesn't like structure. He likes his own morality. Then he now says structure is a problem. And again, this is back to the whole Christianity versus religion. But I stand corrected because you told me we're talking about Christianity here. Who defines morality? He does, basically, right? He likes the fact that he's a self-arbiter of his own morality, but it's basically saying because he's able to discern what is right and wrong, he's inherently his own judge, his own jury, and all of that. So and that's a problem because for the Christian, God is the one who defines morality. And side note, morality, being a good person, basic morality and all that, you don't need to be a Christian. That's something innate in the Bible calls it's written in the hearts of men. Okay. But we'll come back to maybe that a later point. But just to touch on this though, is that he's basically trying to be his own God when you just remove all the fluff. That's what he is. He doesn't like the fact that we have to adhere to something God said. But no. I like my own morality. I know what's good. I'd be a good person. I'm not a bad person. And that's another fruit of the same tree. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yep. Lexi, go on.
I'm still in mid thought, but I think about so according to what are they called? American Psychological Association, people of faith, people who are religious, have a higher quality of life than people who aren't. And so I think that while you may, not you, hypothetically you, may feel like you don't need it, your life is better with it. And so I think that like in the same way, and I'm talking like I'm leveling with an atheist, of course, right? Because as a Christian, I'm like, it's not even that you need it. Like that's how it's supposed to be. But if I was talking to an atheist, I would start at that place and say like, okay, if we know that drinking water and exercising and eating healthy and all of those things improve your quality of life, but then also religion does, and it makes it seem like there's something inherent about it, like there's something like vital about it that I need to explore more. It's not just like, oh, I don't need God, because my life compared to somebody who is leaning on a God of some sort is worse off. Does that make sense? And so I think that's probably like my starting point, and then it would be more from there. Okay, then why Christianity out of all the other religions, right? But I think you don't know you're missing something until you have it, right? You don't know you're thirsty until you drink water. And you're like, oh snap, I'm like chugging this, right? So I think it's the same. Like that's my perspective on it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
One sec. They'll back with and maybe I'm off here, but the morality point is the fact that, and this is another thing, because the Bible acknowledges this, right? Morality, being good, being bad. The Bible acknowledges that this is not something that requires you to be, as it were, someone who knows God. It's something that God inscribes in your heart. This, you shouldn't do that. You should do. There's a basics. So for him to say that, because he's okay, like Joel said, he's attacking Christianity. Christianity doesn't even oppose that notion. What Christianity is telling you is that whatever idea of morality you have is already fundamentally flawed, and that's not something he's willing to agree or accept. So any self-principle that you bring, that you basically raise to live by, is already defeated from the beginning. So its quick point is, if we're talking about morality and trying to figure out, okay, how do we define good and bad? What they would probably say is, well, society has basically over the years been able to kind of remove and weed out, okay, this is not such a good idea. This is a good idea. We don't like slavery. Slavery is a bad idea. We don't do that anymore, right? So we've, as they say, evolved, right? Okay. So now, if that's the case, if our metric for good and bad is based off what we generally agree on as society, what if you get to a point where society agrees that slavery is what if we like reverse the cycle, basically? So basically morality now becomes this kind of moving target. It's basically aligns and kind of what's the word I'm looking for here? It basically aligns with whatever society thinks. So that's a problem, because there has to be still, at the end of the day, he's running away from this. There's an objective definition of a morality, and Christians, we look up and say the Lord, he defines it. And however we feel is irrelevant. This is an immovable metric for morality, God, right? But for him, it's like, no. Morality is something that we don't need a God to define for us. We just have to look within ourselves, so to say. So I just wanted to put that in before you go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's important, to kind of look at, because, even in the example you gave. Now let's assume, we looked at it and said, hey. Now we look back and say, well, you know what? Slavery wasn't good, right? We all agree, like slavery wasn't good. We shouldn't have kept, Africans as slaves. Why? Why wasn't slavery good? At the time, slavery was good. People agreed as a society that slavery was okay. So how do we now get to judge their morality if it's everything's relative? So if you come to a place wherein they are raping kids, that's what they do. Why would that be bad? It's relative. So the problem with that argument, because here's the funny thing, he talked about not even about it being relative based off of society. He talked about relative as an individual. So that's a whole different thing. Relative as a society is even crazy, right? Because that means every society gets to decide. That means he doesn't. And you know what's so funny about this? And this is why I said, even on a logical perspective, even looking at it from just a logical argument, it doesn't make sense. Because he is not even following his own argument. Because if morality was relative, he shouldn't have problems with people kicking cats. He shouldn't have problems, right, with women being thrown off buildings. He shouldn't have problems with homosexuals being killed. He shouldn't have problems with it. Why? Because maybe in that society it is relative. Mm-hmm. That is something that they all agreed on, that is what they want to follow. And that's the problem with the idea of relativity. It only applies to people that you disagree with.
Yeah.
When you agree with someone, it's no longer relative. Oh, we're great. But when you disagree with someone, what are you talking about? And it's crazy. Like it makes no sense. It would be insane if I tell my child to do something and then I come back, she doesn't do it. And I'm like, why didn't you do it? Dad, it's relative. I'm like, what? Okay, well, my flogging you is also relative, right? My whooping your butt is relative. We shall relatively hang out today. Something important, but it's crazy how that argument sounds sound until you put it under the microscope and you start looking at it and you say, hey, if what you're saying is true, you shouldn't have, and there are two, and the whole in the argument is this: if he's saying that these things are relative based off of what society decides to do, then fine. Whatever society decides at the time is right. Whatever society decides at the time is right. And what is society? The majority. Why? Because everyone can agree on everything. So the majority, whatever the majority decides at the time, is fine. Don't fight it. Live with it. Right?
I think he would argue that society is progressive and adaptive.
Of course.
So slavery was a bad thing. We now,
So what about the areas of the world that have not progressed? What about the areas of the world that have not progressed? Are you going to force your stuff on them? At that point, it's no longer relative. You are trying to show that you are right. You have progressed, so thereby they must progress. But why? It's relative. If your society,
go ahead.
If your society has progressed, right, that is because you guys decided to progress. Clap for yourself. My society hasn't progressed. We like the way we are. Leave us as we are. That is the problem. The argument has no foundation to stand on. It's crazy. Go ahead.
I was going to say.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I wasn't going to really say anything. Go ahead.
Oh. Yeah. You just made me lose my. Okay, here we go. So two things. The one part is, because interestingly, he goes into politics and talks about how he hates the majority kind of rule in terms of politics. So it's like when it comes to religion or it comes to God's law or morality, majority doesn't always mean they're right? I mean, majority basically determines what's right, but then he goes into other spheres of life that he doesn't like. He doesn't like one majority, but that's a different topic. What I wanted to highlight was, so today, right, we'll say slavery was bad, fine. But then what he's basically doing, he's speaking from privilege in the sense that he's already fast forward. If he was back then, right, being of a certain color or of a certain race, hey, this is what we do, right? You don't have any framework to say this is wrong because this is what we do. You fast forward into the future, 2020, you hear someone has a slave, whoa, right? Because you said society has progressed. The difference is, and what he's running away from, back to that statement, I don't need a structure outside my own morality. Well, the Bible adds being, because people always say the Bible promotes slavery. It's like, bro, did you read the Bible, bro? Did you really read it? The Bible has been consistent from then till now in terms of its. People are like, well, people use the Bible to promote slavery. Really? That's probably a different topic of its own. But the emphasis here is that there's been a standard, God, right? Whether or not it was 2,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, or now, it's been unwavering, the standard. And the second point, or last point I wanted to make was today, right? Today, if you meet somebody for the first time, in some places, shaking hands is how you greet them, right? No one's going to say that's bad, I don't think, generally speaking. In some places, they give them a holy kiss, okay? A holy kiss. Kiss them on the cheek, mwah, mwah, mwah. How you doing? Okay, great. Some places, it's a hug, right? And in some places, they eat them. So what are you going to say? So for them, the people that they meet, right? Like if they eat you up, it means you're a pretty good guest. Well, what are you going to say? That's wrong. How? Why is that wrong? Right? As far as they're concerned, in their milieu, in their vicinity, and their surrounding, this is what we do. Right? So that's the problem with when you have these subjective definitions of morality. Go ahead.
So I do think that we have to be careful not to contradict ourselves, because we're saying that we do have a sort of a compass embedded in us that tells us what's right from wrong according to scripture, right? Mm-hmm. Is that correct? So yeah. I think to clarify, it's not that people don't know right from wrong, it's that they ignore whatever affects them.
No, I think the point being made, right, isn't looking at it from the biblical worldview. It's looking at it from their own worldview and applying their own worldview to their own argument, saying if you're saying that everything is relative, right, we get to decide what is true, right? There is no right or wrong. So from their worldview, mm-hmm. there is nothing written in our hearts. There is no such thing as truth, right? Everything is whatever I decide, right? And we all agreed to come up with this, right? So if that is what we all decided, thereby, whatever we do is right. That is what relative morality is. Whatever we do is right, as long as we all decided this, right? And that is if we're even applying this to the societal standard. Because based on what he was saying, it sounded more individual. That is even worse. That is even worse. But as a society, right? Let's take it to the highest level, right? Just so that we're not making an argument that is that isn't true, right? Let's make a clean argument here. Let's say we're talking about a societal standard in general, right? Like, so this is what we all agreed to do.
Right.
If this is what we all agreed to do, then at this point, this is what we agreed to do. If someone else down the street came together as a loose society and they agreed to do something else, that is them, right? We can't say we're right because it's relative. Mm-hmm. So what happens when we decide we're right and we go over to them and tell them, no, you have to change? At that point, the very dogma that he's talking about is there. You have already decided what is true. You have already set your own rules, and you're trying to go ahead.
I got you.
Okay, so that's the argument. That it makes no sense on just following their own stuff. Minus even I didn't use the Bible. The Bible is on the shelf. It's on the shelf, right? We're just talking about logic. Logically, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next clip. Okay, so this is the next clip we have here, and let's see. Okay, and let's do this one.
But I think you're right. We are scared and alone, and the idea of death is horrible. What, you'll never exist again? What was the point? And again, I talk about this in Afterlife 1, where I say, Kath's saying that if you think it's, there's no heaven, why don't you kill yourself? And I say, so if you're watching a really good film, but you know it's going to end, you might as well just stop it. She went, no, because I can watch it again. And I say, I think that's the amazing thing about life. You can't watch it again. One day you'll hug, your mum for the last time. You'll smell your last flower. You'll eat your last meal. You won't know it's your last, but it will be your last. And so you've got to make the most of everything. And it is a terrifying prospect. It is kind of sad that we'll never exist again, I think. But it doesn't mean it's not true. The bottom line is, I can't believe something I don't believe. And so how do I find meaning? Well, we are here. We are here. The chances of us being us, you being you and me being me, existing now, that sperm hitting that egg is 400 trillion to 1. You know, we're not special, but we are lucky. We do exist. It's incredible.
Okay. All right. So he said a lot there. Now, open the floor. What do we think?
My favorite line is, I can't believe what I don't believe. It's so powerful. Like I have a friend who's atheist, and she said the same thing. She's like, she came to Bible study once and she was like, it just all looks so nice, but I just don't believe it. Like I don't know how people get from not believing to believing. Like there's this like huge gap between that. And so that just like really resonated with me.
Awesome. Was there anything else you said in there that you thought was interesting? Do you have an answer for any of the stuff? Like, what's your answer for not believing what you don't believe? So no, okay, hold on. So what did you tell her when she said that? When she said, "Oh, I don't believe what I don't believe," what did you say? Did you say, "Good"?
No, I mean, I think that faith comes by hearing the word of God, and so it's just me being consistent in terms of, you know, sharing the word with her, whether it's through my lifestyle or quite literally. And so I do that. We're kind of like pen pals, so we write letters to each other. But I think that I think there is something to the fact that is like, it's not by works, it's a gift from God. Okay, so if it's a gift from God, and then whosoever believes, like, it's just like, how do you get from the place of, like, this is a literal question I'm having. Like, I don't have the answer. Like what I'm saying, like, how do you get from a place where you're receiving this gift from God? Because it's whosoever believes, right? So then how do you get from I don't believe to now I believe?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question, which kind of goes to the first question you asked before of like, oh, do you want to talk about predestination, blah blah blah? And I'm like, yeah. That was the whole thing. But here's the thing, right? Even when we talk about this topic of like not believing and because here's the thing, none of us are coming to God out of our own will, per se. Where it's like, oh, I want God today, because we never want Him. We always want our own things, or even though we know something's missing, we seek something else. God is the one who calls each one of us to Himself, right?
Okay.
And that's what's interesting about this entire thing. God calls us in the sense of the Spirit of God working in us, and it could be something as simple as you having the conversations with her. Those are the tools, because not everyone who starts today meets Christ tomorrow. Sometimes it takes them years before they meet Christ. You find someone that lived 60 years and then on their 60th birthday, they met Jesus. It's like, whoa, for all this time, people have preached to you, it never, you know what I'm saying? And that's the thing. So we don't have a timetable to put God under. Our job is to preach the gospel. That is the only thing we can do. Love our neighbors and preach the gospel. That's what I'm saying. And the thing is, you know, and I don't want to come off, I don't want to sound callous or sound like, you know, because yeah, sure, because it's easy sometimes, right, to look at these things and have this whole thing of looking down on people. But it's like it's because sometimes it's such an easy thing that happens, and you might not even intend to do it, right? It just kind of happens. It's of course having like this whole having like this sorrow, you know, that is triggered by love, wherein you just feel like, man, Lord, I want to pray for this person. You see what I'm saying? Lord, I want to bring this person to you daily. You know, and I notice how a lot of people preach the gospel without prayer, which is another weird thing. It's like, what? It's like, where's the power there, right? We need the prayer and we need the gospel. So we need both. You present the gospel to someone and pray to God about that person because you care about them. If I saw my child, you know, going into the world and doing things that I know don't glorify God and she's headed the wrong way, what am I going to do? Just preach to her? I'm going to pray a lot. That's why you have like the praying mothers, right? They always say the praying mothers. Oh, your mother prayed for you. I don't know why they never say the praying fathers. Why is it always the mothers? What is this? Like the fathers never pray. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, but prayer is so important, and sometimes it's, there are two things in churches, right, that get demeaned. Two things: the word and prayer. Sometimes in different churches, some churches prayer is demeaned. Oh yeah, just pray 2 minutes and you're fine. Some churches the word is demeaned. No, we just need to pray. It's like, no, you need both. It's a balanced diet, right? So my answer to that would be, someone who doesn't believe, as long as they are listening, keep talking, keep praying, right? As long as the person's not like, I don't want to hear you, and at that point you might need to be like, I'm quiet. Then they'll be like, okay, no. So I'm saying, and me, they put their hands that you talk again. But as long as they're listening, keep speaking, and then pray for them. So that would be my little answer to that. Ross, based off the video, what do you think? What do you think? I need your thoughts before we move to the next step.
Yeah, basically saying YOLO, right? That's basically what he's saying. You only live once, and that's very against the Bible, because he says death is such a horrible thing, right? And if God does not exist, if God is not real, then yes, right? I agree with you, because he says, "What's the point?" Exactly, right? Because it's like this relativism that that they have, which can take you into, and Russell Brand talks about it a little bit. Then nihilism or nihilism, one is just extreme, just doesn't matter. That's only a perspective that comes when you take God from the equation. You see, the Christian perspective, we who believe in Jesus Christ, death is not the end. That's like a core, which comes back to preaching the gospel. The gospel takes care of all these problems. When you present the gospel to someone, it answers all these questions about death and life and all that. So his trepidations about death, it's a real thing. It's a real one. I remember I listened to Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry is another British atheist as well, and he's the same circle as I guess you can Ricky Gervais, because they're both British. He says, because the oftentimes when an atheist is talking, they don't believe in God, they don't believe in God, blah blah blah. There's no evidence for God. Okay, fine. And people ask, what happens when you die, right? Because we know, at least, granted all things, they can't argue that you die. They can disbelieve everything, but they can argue you die. Okay, when you die and you see God, what are you gonna do, right? His response was, I'm going to tell God, how dare you? Yeah, I was amazed that the presence of mind to even say that. It's like, if all my life I've said there's no God, right? And then I die and I see him, my response is going to be like, how dare you? Where were you when? Because where were you when people were getting sick? Where were you? Is basically going to put God on trial anyway. So, but the gospel takes care of his statement about, well, the point of death. I can't believe something I don't believe. Yeah, because you're trying to generate a worldview that's not really coherent. It has so many holes in it, and then it's not consistent with actually how you live, right? Because his worldview it's not coherent with how we live as human beings. So anyway, let me not belabor the point. So those are the few things that came to mind.
All right. Did you want to add something to it, Lex?
I was going to say, can our next topic be predestination, please?
Well, we'll think about it. We'll think about it.
It's killing me.
Okay,
because the comment of "how dare you, God" is just like, it's the same concept. It's like, atheists are searching. It's a lot of atheists are searching. It's not like they're not. Like, the reason why they're so hardcore is because they want to find God. Like, that's what I believe. Like, deep down, they want to be wrong. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that if they find that they were wrong, it's like, dang, why didn't I get to experience you too? So that's just my 2 cents, my advertisement for.
Yeah. I think we'll look at that topic, and it probably won't be next week, because next week we already have a topic for next week. Maybe
cool.
A few weeks after or something, we'll look at that, because that's a topic we really want to dive into, because I know that's a topic that would be very controversial to a few people, depending on the circle they're in. But you can't run away from the word of God. The word of God speaks for itself. Now, the one part of what you said I disagree with 100% is that they are seeking God. I don't think they are. because I think some people are seeking God, but those are not the ones that would call themselves atheists. Those are the ones that would say they are agnostics. They are the ones that would say, I don't know. I'm seeking an answer. An atheist has arrived at go ahead.
Yeah, they'll say I'm open. Yeah.
Okay. An atheist has arrived at a place of conclusion where they have decided. Then from that place of conclusion, they're going, well, if God appeared to me, then da da da. God will not appear to you. Like, and that's the weird thing about it. Like, when you get to that point, God is not appearing to you unless he has a thing to do with your life, unless he wants to use your life for something grand in his plan. Because it's like you have arrived. Only a fool says there is no God. Like, because you're not saying, I don't know if there is a God. Because no scripture doesn't say, well, only a fool says, I don't know if there's a God. Says, a fool says, there is no God. So it's like, you're looking at all this, the grandness of the universe, and you sat in your little chair and said, there is no God. No one.
I'm using base though. I'm using his definition of atheism as a premise of my comment. So like he said, I haven't found evidence of God yet. So I'm using that definition as a basis of, to say there's no evidence yet would mean that you're digging for evidence.
Or you just said there is no, or you just said it. It doesn't mean you're doing it. It just means you said it. Example, now there are 6 billion Christians in the world. Are you sure there are 6 billion Christians in the world? It's obviously like everyone is Christian. It's obviously it means nothing.
Yeah.
Aha, exactly. So it means nothing. So even though he makes that statement, which I understand where your point is coming from, right? It doesn't mean he is, because everything he says afterwards shows that he has arrived at a place of conclusion. And what he expects now is this: for his heart to change, God has to appear to him, and there has to be clarity. Because like Bro Ross says earlier, even if God, because people always say, and I love how scripture talks about this. For example, now people say, well, you know, if God just did something grand, you know, people will come to Christ. And this is what I always say.
Nope.
If right now we all go outside, we saw an angel in the clouds with his sword flames, his eyes red, and he said with a loud voice, Jesus is real. He is real and he's coming back soon. For 24 hours, everyone would be freaked out running to church. A month later, they were explaining it away on CNN. It was the thunder. It was the clouds, the formation of the clouds. If you look at the sword is not really a sword. It's lightning that was shaped this way. We would explain it away simply because we don't want to follow God. It just, because scripture talks about this, right? If you think about the rich man and Lazarus, right? The rich man's
beautiful.
What he asked was like, just send someone from the dead. Let them go talk to my people. If someone, I'm sure they will be saved. I'm sure they will repent. Abraham was like, what? No, they got the prophets. If they don't listen to them, even if someone raises from the dead, they will still not listen.
Yeah.
So it's what I'm saying, and that's part of the whole thing, right? It's like, yeah, of course we think but the heart of man is desperately wicked. Like, you know what I'm saying? And it's hard to really know it because it's such a mess. And sometimes we explain away why we don't but it doesn't mean it's true. It just means that's what we say. Okay, let's go to the next clip. We have 2 more clips to do.
Before you go to the next clip,
okay, go ahead.
Which is why the Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians that God chose the foolishness of preaching the gospel to save men. He basically wanted to remove our thirst for evidence. He wanted to squarely put salvation on faith, like that is. It says to the Greek, foolishness, right? To the Jews, a stumbling block. He wanted to condense to point being, you come to him is by faith. Like, it's not because, I saw X, Y, and Z. It could happen. That could be a seed that will eventually lead you to faith. But when it comes to faith, he said he chose the foolishness of preaching to bring men to salvation. That removes everyone's, lust and thirst for, evidence. So, yeah.
And if you think about it, this is the same thing that Jesus Christ tells Thomas. Tells him, he says, you believe because you've seen. Well, blessed are those who believe without what? Seeing. Because that is,
he still appears. He's like, put your hand on my side and my hand.
Exactly.
Like, exactly.
but you know what? Christ understood, and I don't want to say Christ. I don't want to put myself in Christ. So, but I was just say, I believe, this is just my thought, that Christ was talking to us, today's Christians and believers, because he wasn't always going to be there. Thomas was one of those people that it's like, yeah, it's like, but blessed, I'm not to say blessed are those. It's almost like you're not blessed, but Christ didn't say that, but it was like, blessed are those. So what about me, Jesus? What about me? Jesus was like, hey, blessed are them. So the idea is this: he knew that what was coming up for us was different,
right?
In the sense of like, we won't have Christ there, so we would have to trust and believe that God is who God says he is, to follow him, without all the physical proof that we need. Even though we see proof everywhere, but we want to put our finger in his side. That's what we want. So here's the funny thing. Even though Christ was there, he still needed to make sure it was Jesus. It's insane. Insane. And that's what an average atheist would do. Even if God appeared to them tomorrow, they're like, how do I know you're God? I need to touch your beard. Do you have beard? It's like what is it? So we will always have another thing, because we think if God just comes, it's enough. No, there will always be something. We'll move the goalpost. Now God has to show me 5 miracles. Okay, God shows me 5 miracles. We'll move the goalpost again. How do I know He's really God? You know, how do I know that it's not just my memory? You know, we move.
He gave it to Gideon. Is that Gideon's story where he
LSD? So what?
Wasn't that Gideon's story where it was like a whole bunch of signs?
Yeah, with the fleece and
and
the
with the other clicks, we can keep going on and on.
Yeah. So, but let me touch on Gideon because I love that you brought that up, because those like kind of things. Well, he did it to da da da, so thereby he should do it da da da.
Are you putting me in front of me?
No, I'm not making fun of you. I'm just saying. No, here's the thing about those stories, especially in the Old Testament. We look at even some of the things that we see in the New. That's not the standard operation of God. It's not. You know, because we see the standard operation of God being one thing. Now, of course, he sometimes, and we kind of even see this. Jesus didn't call everyone like he called Apostle Paul. Right? Where he literally stops the guy on the way to Damascus. And it's like, you can't go. Right? He didn't call everyone like that. You know what I'm saying? So there are specific people that God could do that for, right? For a specific reason, right? But he doesn't do it for everybody. And guess what? He's God. He decides what he wants to do. You know, but if we now write that off and say, well, God, we should. Okay, so if God does it for Ricky Gervais, right? Does it for Stephen Fry. So every atheist in the world, God will appear to them and say, oh, I'm here to do a magic trick. Tell me what to do so that I can show you I'm God. No. Let's go to the next clip. Let's see what we got here. All right. So this is the next clip, and let's play.
Mystery science. All science it does is it's a discipline that follows the evidence. And what science keeps saying, and some people say this is a flaw, that it's been wrong before. Well, science never been wrong before. Our interpretation, science has been wrong before. You know, science is just a way to look and understand the physical universe. And what science says, it keeps saying, okay, this is the least wrong theory we've got so far. And then the next day it goes, okay, we're even less wrong today. We were less wrong today. You know, they've mapped the beginning of the universe to a fraction of a second, which is pretty close. But I think science keeps proving itself over and over again. And the fact that we don't understand, you know, the mind-body problem completely yet, that is the beauty. And the more we understand, the more questions it throws up. It's like, you know, people say the missing link. Like there's this fossil and there's this fossil, and we find that one. And people go, no, there's 2 missing links. So you can't win, you know. And all science can do is just keep filling the gaps and finding new gaps.
Okay. All right. So so that was something, and I like that because he talks about science in general, right? And what science has been able to do, and what it hasn't been able to do. And I always think it's funny when people talk about science, because I think sometimes Christians are scared of science, which is weird to me. I don't understand why. I'm like, no, don't be scared of science. Science is a beautiful thing. Science explains, or science shows us what our universe is made of, right? What science cannot do is talk about how it was made. It just tells you what it's seen, what it observes, right? Science cannot, get you to that point. It can make theories about what it thinks, but it can't get you there. So he makes that point here where it says, hey, you know what? Science doesn't have all the answers. But then I think it's funny that they put so much faith in something that they claim doesn't have all the answers. But their faith is so strong in the thing.
Exactly.
Right? It's insane. It's like, don't you guys see how insane this is? Like, you're saying that Christians or, religious people in general have faith in a God, whatever, right? But you have faith in something that keeps proving itself wrong. That goes, today we think it's right, then tomorrow it's like, well, maybe our understanding of the science wasn't right. So which means the error there isn't science itself, it's the humans explaining it. So the humans are the error. Then how can we now be the judge of what is right? If even our brightest minds can't even be trusted 100%, how can we now be the judge of what is true? What is right and true? So anyway, I open the floor. What do you guys think?
I think I'm going to echo, one of y'all said this, that like God purposefully does things that are miraculous and abnormal to sort of defy science. And so like science explains the natural world, the way things are supposed to, like the principle of nature, right? However, like Christ rising from the dead, all the crazy stuff, the Red Sea parting, like those things cannot be explained by science to further prove God, right? That he's so above us, that he's so abstract that like he cannot be proven by something that's supposed to prove something natural or normal, right? Because it's supernatural. So I think that's my little tidbit to that.
Yeah. Science is a religion. It's a source of faith. Not for everyone, but for some people, especially not agnostics, for some atheists. Scientism, I guess you can call it. But which is why for like so many isms, it's naturalism. Basically, only what we can see and what we can observe is what we believe, right? Interesting thing about that is it's not able to explain. I'm not even going to use the word spiritual things, but like things are, what's the word I'm looking for? Is it metaphysical? Like your soul, your mind, like just if we're going to go with science, okay, fine. Explain the mind. And they've tried, there's some atheists out there like Sam Harris. He's one of the more staunch, they call him one of the four horsemen of atheism, but he tries to explain the mind and how the mind is just a function of the brain and the molecules and all, or even Richard Dawkins talks about how your mind is just, your molecules just dancing around, mindless process, he calls it. But they can't explain how the mind works, how the how we go from something material, because you have an explosion, big bang, poof, okay, I'll give you that. And then over trillions or whatever, hundreds of millions of years, things collide and then this gas forms. Of course, this is a very, very, it's a caricature of what they say, but you get the gist. This happens, that happens. And eventually one time we hit the earth, boom. And then, the moon runs into the earth and then it forms an atmosphere. And then, okay, over some years, gases form. Okay, then we get water. Okay, from water, things form. And the next thing you know, we have life. All right, so pause. So you go from immaterial, right, to material. So you go from something that's just material to something organic, right? Well, they'll say, well, the basis of everything organic is carbon. Okay, fine, I'll give you that. So you go from that to the fish, and then from the fish we get, the story of evolution. Okay, I'll give you that. But how do you go from Big Bang to consciousness, right? How do you go from matter to consciousness? They can't. It's all theories. Thanks, bro, for pointing that out. The best you can do is theorize. Now, that's okay. But just say that, you see, because the problem is they take that and then that becomes, as it were, the explanation of all things, or as Stephen Hawkins, the theory of all things, right? Or theory of how everything exists. So science is very limited, but provided we at least be honest in its limitations, like, okay, it can only explain what it can see, great, but it does not discount the fact that God can exist. Just because God is outside of this universe, he's outside of existence, right? So science cannot disprove God. In fact, it can prove he exists, but it can't disprove he exists. And that's not a point they're willing to agree upon. They want to say that science has disproved God, and that's just not correct. You can't disprove him, because science only deals on what is observable, what we can see, what we can handle, what we can touch. Science could prove that Christ resurrected. It could, right? Because it's something observable, you see, but it can't prove that he exists now. Or sorry, it can't even disprove that, you see. So there's limitations to science, and then that's something that he's not aware of. But because of the faith that, you know, a lot of them have in science, it blinds them from the flaws that it potentially has. Let's keep it as what it is, a discipline to help us to observe the known reality, or observe the known world. Fine. But then when you now begin to delve into faith, which is what he's talking about here, you fall into problems. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think I actually think that is one of those things that that the more we look at it, the more you realize just how interesting this whole thing is, because we're talking about, because he made a point just now which I think is actually interesting, that how everything, the creation of the universe, can be brought to a millisecond, right? The one spot, one time, everything comes in. Now we know that God spoke the word. At least that's what Scripture says, and everything came to be. So so what science has been able to observe is that everything started from one point in time, one spot, and everything came out at once. It wasn't a slow thing that evolved over time. I'm talking about the creation of the universe was something that expanded immediately. And then now when they're talking about life, of course, those things are different. And that kind of goes along with how the creation story goes, that he spoke it and it came to be. The creation story doesn't tell it like it's something that took time. It's something that was almost like he spoke it and it came out. So, and that's why I think it's interesting about science. This is why science, to me, I think it's one of the best tools for Christians. I don't actually think science is against. I think it's best tools for Christians if we know how to take the time to actually understand what we're seeing. Because it's like this. He just made a point to say this. And if you watch the entire clip, one of the things that he says is this: science is typically not wrong. He says it's our understanding of it, our explanation of it that is wrong. And I'm like, great job. That is brilliant. Awesome. Which means sometimes how you're interpreting the data you're seeing could be wrong. It doesn't mean that the data that you're seeing is wrong. And that is the beautiful thing about that. Is this, if we're saying, if we're looking at the science of some of these things that we're saying, we will find more and more that it leads to a creator. For example, now, here's what science can never say. At least not for now. Science cannot say there are no things like aliens. Science can't make that statement. Science can tell you no life can exist in Venus, right? Science can tell you no life can exist in Mars right now, based on what we see. But if we find a few more things, I think they found a little bit of water, so they're thinking maybe something's there. But right now, they're like, we haven't found anything, so we don't know, right? But that's the thing. But they can't tell you that there is no such thing as aliens, because science has not checked the entire universe. It hasn't explored every single planet. It hasn't gone past this dimension to check out the other ones. It hasn't gone through the black hole. Science doesn't know. So science just tells you, we don't know. But guess what? An atheist that believes there are no such thing as aliens, right, will come and say, science has proven there's no aliens. How is that? Just because science did not prove there are aliens? So the only way that they got to the answer is because it didn't prove the thing. So thereby, because it didn't prove the thing, it disproved it? No, it didn't. Science literally just said, I don't know. I haven't found it. So if science has not found God, fine, it makes sense because God is not in the physical. God is not a human being that science will walk to and say, "Hey, oh, this is God. Hey, everyone, this is God. Hey, this is God. Hey, God." No, right?
And that's consistent with Ricky Gervais. He's saying that. He's saying that same thing.
Yeah, he's saying that, and I agree with him. But here's the thing, though. The next clip,
The conclusion.
clip, though, is where he takes his own argument and puts it in the toilet. And I'm like,
Conclusion is therefore God doesn't exist because right now science hasn't found God or science hasn't proven he exists. Right? It's like, okay, therefore he doesn't. It's not like, okay, we're gonna wait to make, because that's atheism, right? Because we don't have evidence for God, therefore there's things. That's the problem. That's the conclusion they're coming to at the particular moment. Versus there's no evidence for God. However, he could exist. They don't say that. They don't say he could. No. He doesn't. So
Agnostics do say that he could or he could not exist. So that's why he was teetering between the two, because you can tell how he talks that he's like in limbo.
I've heard him speak. He doesn't believe God exists. He doesn't. He is firmly on that side. Now, when he says it, he sounds like he's saying no. He's not. He believes God does not exist. Like that, he has formed that opinion. Because if you listen, he said because he has made movies about this. He just made a movie about this. But here's the thing, right? He was talking about his mom dying, right? And he said if he asked her the question, he was going to lie. So he wasn't going to say maybe. He was going to lie and say, yeah. So which means he truly believes it doesn't exist. So and that's the thing, right? It's easy to say one thing, right? But your actions shows what you truly believe. And I think that's the thing. So this is the final clip, and I think this one is very interesting. So please pay attention to this one, because for some reason I think this is the best clip in the entire thing. Because I think this case makes the case for Christ, or makes the case for God more than he doesn't. All right, so we're gonna play this clip right now.
All bets are off. We can talk like this till we're blue in the face, and then quantum physics comes along. And there's that saying, if you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics.
Yeah.
It's magic. Quantum physics, by all our definitions of science and nature, right? And we're intelligent people. We've read a bit. We think, right? We've got a good brain. We've got as good a brain as anyone. But fuck quantum physics. It's mental.
Yes. It sort of seems what I like that came up in our conversation, and I sort of used it to illustrate my feeling that the limitations of our senses and the limitations of our capacity to handle knowledge mean that there will always be a realm beyond knowledge, that all scientific disciplines are contingent upon amplification of existing senses, microscopic, telescopic, even calculating devices like AI, and that I don't see like quantum physics as woo type magic, but I do see it as an indication of fucking hell. There is an intelligence at work.
It's just we can't. Like some people say, you can't understand it like God can understand it because you haven't got God's brain. Well, that is quantum physics to me. The fact that it happens means it exists and it's true and it's scientific. But then to ask us to understand it, now that's a big ask, because it's incredible. Just the uncertainty principle, the fact that I want it to be metaphor. I want it to go. We don't literally mean it's in two places at once. I go, yeah, we do, because the way that time is. Right, start again. Right. I've got two potatoes. It's because, and usually it's the scale of things that we can't fathom.
All right. Okay. I remember when I got to that part of the video, I was just like, what? What?
That thing crumbles.
Like what was it, like the 1 hour mark basically at that point?
Yeah, it's
like,
close.
what-
It's close to like the
Like,
50.
what were you-
Yeah, the 58
Yeah.
minute mark. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, so even in science, we know there are things that science cannot, like, it blows our mind. There are things that almost seem spiritual, that seem crazy. Like it's like magic, even scientifically, right? And it's like, then how do we think that there is no God? Like, how do we think there isn't a being that, like, oh man, so it's crazy, especially when he talks about this thing, and then he says, well, he believes it because it's science, but he doesn't want to believe it because that's what he's trying to say. What he kept saying was they want it to be a metaphor. You know, that's what people talk about. You know, that's what people talk about with God and with the Word of God. Oh, it's a metaphor. That's what they always go to. It has to be a metaphor. You know, there's no way people can walk on water. What is that? But there's actually an arm of science that shows it's possible in the right. It's insane.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think he says verbatim, like, the fact that we don't understand doesn't mean it's not true.
Yep.
He's verbatim, and I'm like, yo, your whole argument
Out the window.
It's
I like, which is why out of the two, Russell Brand is, because obviously you have to kind of listen to the whole thing, but you can kind of see the progression. Russell Brand is basically, he's like, yeah, I'm a little different because he's had some life experiences that basically has humbled him a little bit, because he used to be an atheist, radical atheist. He was basically like a hedonist, basically in a soft way. He used to just basically do whatever he felt, and then something happened, and then he's trying to kind of do like a rethink and trying to be sober and all that. Now he is into the more spiritual realm and all that, but he was humbled. So you can see he's a little bit more. What's the word? He's honest, but he's a little bit more easier to admit, right? Certain things. Like, look, he says, the quantum physics and all the magic and mystical nature around it indicates there's an intelligence. I don't know if you caught that part where he says there's an intelligence, but then he obviously Ricky started speaking, so that part was kind of cut off. But yeah, it's like, yes, that's what we've been trying to tell you. Well, not we.
You know
That's
what,
what the Bible tells you.
That's a misunderstanding. Because I think let's clarify something. Russell Brand believes that there is something more than here. He truly believes this because he has gone through this whole thing where he went through drugs and stuff like that, and he has this whole story of what happened to him. So he believes that, and the reason why he brought it up was because he wanted to challenge, he wanted Ricky on this, right? To see, like, if you could maybe shine some light that there's something more. Now, of course, he's not a Christian. Of course, he's not. He doesn't believe in one God. He believes there's a being, universe. He believes in the universe, in a sense, like the universe. There's a thing that is out there, which, like I said before, is very similar to the unknown God. It's very similar. He needs someone like Apostle Paul to stop and say, "Oh, that being in the universe. Let's talk about it.
Let me tell you about that guy.
Let me talk about that guy. Let's shine some light on this, right? But it's fascinating that because he was able to make this point, right? And this is a point that I haven't seen Christians even make. That even from a scientific perspective, there's an aspect of science that blows people's brains. That people are like, this is magic. You know what I'm saying? Like, this makes no sense to our human brains, right? Yeah. And it's almost like when you unwrap one thing, there are 10 other mysteries. That's right. It's insane. So how can you get to a point where we don't even understand what is here, and then we're going, there's no creator.
There's no God. That's the problem. That's the lack of. Go ahead, Lexi. Go ahead. I don't want to get
I was
excited.
just going to add that, like, that's science. And then there's this one, I remember in college, he was like, if you look at this piece of paper, the amount of numbers that we have discovered is like a small corner of this whole paper. So there's like numbers beyond us that we haven't even, there's like a world of math that we haven't even touched upon. That's like the rest of the sheet of paper. And it's like, that's mind blowing how much we don't know. It's mind blowing.
I'll tell you this, right? I am pretty dumb. I don't know a lot of things, right? And but in my dumbness, you see, the good thing about if we're intellectually honest, right? We realize just how dumb we are.
Exactly.
Right? We just realize that we're dumb. Like, okay, cool. I don't know, because today computers are better than us, and we made them. How dumb are we? We made things that are better than us, right? And it's insane when we think about and maybe this is the problem with an atheistic view of the world. Like I always say, and I will keep saying this. I think having an agnostic, an agnostic, right? That's the word, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think it's agnostic.
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 that
Yeah.
word
Okay.
tongue twister.
Correct me if I'm wrong, please. Don't allow me to look like a fool on the internet.
And,
Yeah. But to have that kind of a worldview, I think is better, because that's a worldview that says I am seeking an answer. I don't know, right? And I love that. Like I love when someone is seeking an answer. It's great because because the main things I'm seeking answers for, I don't know. I'm not sure. Lord, help me. And sometimes stuff like that. But when someone goes, it is not, then you better be 100% sure. You better know. You can't talk about, it would be like someone has never met me, right? But they tell my wife that I'm not alive. I don't exist. My wife's like, what do you? He's in the house. I just left the house. They're like, no, he's not. No, he's not. He doesn't. I'm like, what are you talking about? And that's the problem, right? Just because you haven't met God doesn't mean God is not there. It just means you haven't met God. That's it, right? And it's one thing to say, I haven't met God, so I don't know. Glory, let's pray for you. Glory, let's show you who this God is. Glory, hopefully, maybe that's the beginning of something, right? Doesn't mean you'll get it, but that's the beginning. When someone goes, God is not real, and then you find out that we have mysteries that our brains can't even fathom. We have mysteries that blow I'm talking about the most brilliant of us, right? That trust in science so much. There are mysteries in the science that blows their mind. So which means these things, and the problem with when people talk about science most times, the misunderstanding that they have is this. They think science was created by scientists. They think science was created by scientists. So that's their understanding. They think, oh, they made it up. No, they didn't. They are observing what was already made. That is literally what science is. You're observing the natural law. You're observing what was already made. Here is this thing. How do we understand this thing? Da 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 da. But before you came to observe it, that thing was already there. You just came to observe it. You are now figuring out what has been there for years, generations. But
Right.
you're figuring it out. You didn't create it. If you look at our greatest creations, right, are based off of the things that we met on this planet. Oh, we have an airplane. Oh, what does that remind you of? Oh, it's a bird. What? Oh, how does a bird lift up from the air? Let's observe that. So they observe the things that are already here, right? Then they see, oh, okay, cool. So if we can take this and put this in this particular, use this particular material, then we observe the things around us. They talk about diamond. Now we can make our own diamonds, right? But before we could make our own diamonds were being made by the earth. The earth was making its own diamonds. The earth didn't need us. The earth was like, hey, listen, I'm balling. We came to discover what the earth was making. And we're like, oh, I like the stones. And then, what's so funny? That we said the stones are great. The earth just made it. Because, and which is funny about our perspective sometimes. Humans tend to think. And now, this is one of the things that I disagree with Ricky about, but I also kind of agree in a sense. When he talked about that we're not that special. Now I'm like, talk about yourself. Oh, well, I'm a little bit special. Talk about yourself, please. But here's the thing, right? But we are not as special as we think we are. That's the thing. And when I'm saying that is this, a fallen man thinks he is the greatest thing. Thereby, he gets to decide what da. A fallen man thinks he's God or he's a god. But a god without a god. So he thinks he is the god. So thereby, he gets to decide. But a fallen man should also realize that everything he's deciding and even the place he is, he had no power over it. He was born in a country. He was born in a particular. You know what I'm saying? Everything he is, pretty much, whether it's male or female, he had no choice. You know, and that's what's funny about it. It's just like how weak we are while we're thinking we're strong. It's ridiculous. All right, go ahead. I'm done for tonight. That's the end of my speech. All right. So yeah. Was there anything else you want to add?
He goes on to say, I think after he made the science argument, he was talking about like, okay, he would be satisfied with saying that God is nature. And so I think that is the part where, kind of like you were saying, like we mimic nature to construct civilization, and like every advancement is like a replication of what exists. And so in that sense, he's created his own religion in a sense. So he has his own faith, he has his own dogma, his own whatever that he is following that makes sense in his own mind, and that's satisfying for him. And I think that is the part where I think evangelism becomes interesting, is because then you have to move from this makes sense in my mind, however, this is why Christianity actually makes sense globally and not this individual thing.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, Russell?
Yeah, that was the kind of the point I was going to make, because this particular discussion is more or less just to kind of remove the mystique from when atheists are arguing. Or I remember when I started watching debates, I didn't want to, because it's kind of like I don't want to hear something that would be contrary to what I believe. But you discover there's not much there if you spend some time, especially if you believe and know what you believe, right? So this discussion is useful for the Christian to be aware that fundamentally speaking, there are flaws in their core beliefs. And I guess I'll conclude by saying, everyone, and this is the design of the designer, right, is searching for truth. There's something they're looking for, and that one thing they're looking for is truth, right? I don't think anyone can necessarily disagree with that. Where we fall into problems is how we get there, and ultimately what conclusion we make about the truth. Every religion is presenting you a truth, right? So Islam, this is our truth. Christianity, this is our truth. Atheism, this is our truth, and all of that. But the uniqueness of the Christian faith is that in order to get to truth, there has to be something by which we test, because all truth isn't subjective. It's by definition objective. It's truth. There's nothing like my truth, or no, there's the truth, right? It's one solid truth. So if everyone is claiming to have this truth, or claiming to be presenting this truth, there has to be a test by which we can use to sift. Nah, that's not that great. Nah. So there has to be something. And if we, this is where I credit Ravi Zacharias, because he has this, it's called the 1 to 5 test, right? I'm not going to go into it now for our time, but essentially if you take every faith, every belief system, including scientism, naturalism, secularism, and all of that, bring it into the same kind of battlefield of this test, the Christian faith is literally the one that cuts through every single metric you throw at it. Very coherent. So, so he just basically needs the gospel, and then he'll be left with the choice to either accept it or not. So.
Okay.
All
right. So on that note, I want to thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Lexi. That's what I'm calling you now. Sorry, that's your new name from me to you. So thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you join us for another conversation sometime down the line, because I know there's one you're itching for. And we'll get there. We'll get there, and I will make sure you're invited for that one. Guys, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching the live stream now, if you're watching the video later, please just leave a like on this video, and leave us a comment if you have a topic, or if there's something that we've said that connects with you. And remember, if you're a believer, if you believe in Christ, just make sure you share the gospel with someone. We are known by the love that we show. That's how we're known as followers of Christ. And if for whatever reason you are just not there yet, you don't believe in Jesus yet, or you think we're wrong, let us know. Let us know. Leave us a comment. I'll be sure to pray for you, and and hopefully maybe if we can get into a conversation, we'd love to have a conversation with you. All right, guys, thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful day, and